I'm Professor Wallace. I'm chairman of the International Institute, and I want to welcome you. Our executive director is not here, but if she were, she would insist that I tell you that we have brochures at the front desk which describe our great works. So if you want to learn about them, please do. I want to thank the Potomac Institute, with whom the ILI has done many things, or more accurately, they're tremendously active and they do a few things with us. And I want to welcome General Gray, as always, Yonah, whom you'll be hearing from, Sharon, and I gather a vast number of interns. So anyway, welcome to you all. You have the announcement of the program, so you know it's Latin American security challenges. Most parts of the world are always subject to instability, and particularly today, of course, we know about the near chaos in the Middle East, the lack of certainty in Europe, and I've also thought Latin America is a relatively optimistic, secure part of the world, but I gather it also has security challenges, and that's the subject of this program. So at this point, I will introduce Yonah, who is in charge for the rest of the day. Thank you. You can sit if you want. You can sit, Yonah, if you want. Yonah.
What?
If you want to sit, I can put this in front of you.
Just to begin, anyway. Don, as always, is a true academic. He knows when he has a full academic hour or just a few minutes. I will try to follow his footsteps. First of all, let me introduce the panel. Initially, Ambassador Roger Noriega, right here to my right. I always say, not politically, but at any rate, former Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere Affairs, including, of course, Canada, Latin America, and Caribbean. And he was former ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the Organization of American States. Currently, he's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I will come back to him a little bit later. Next to him is Professor Gary Simon, who is director of the Division of Infectious Diseases, the Medical Facility Associates at George Washington University. Next to him is Dr. Jerry Sandler, professor of medicine and pathology at the Georgetown University Medical Center and medical director of the Blood Transfusion Service, MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. Next to him is Dr. Asha George, a friend and colleague who is the co-director of the Blue Ribbon Study Panel on Biodefense, and she will tell you all about it. And next to her, Dr. Tara Kirk-Sell. She was a member of the U.S. national team, swim team, for 8 years, and she served as a captain for 6 national teams. She earned a silver medal at the 2004 Olympics in Athens. Currently, she's an associate at the Center of Health Security at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Baltimore. And last but not least, Dr. Rashid Shutani, who is currently at the George Washington University and a senior fellow at the Potomac Institute. And as always, General Al Gray, the former 29th Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps,
former
and is the chairman of the boards of regents of the Potomac. As we always say, a great American. He will make some closing remarks. I would like to have a couple of footnotes to prepare some sort of a context to our discussion. First of all, very briefly, last night it just happened that at some event I met 2 of my GW colleagues, 2 professors, retired professors. One retired professor in history, and the other one retired professor in physics. at the George Washington University. We know each other for many years. At any rate, we started talking, and they asked me what I'm doing, what's our next seminar. So I thought, I will actually ask them to guess what the topic would be for the seminar. So the history professor said, I'm sure that you're going to deal with the lessons of history, particularly because yesterday, June 22nd, marked the 75th anniversary of the invasion of Germany of the Soviet Union. So to commemorate that particular event and to talk about the implications for the national security concerns at this time, we have to go all the way back. I said, you're wrong, try maybe another possibility. So he said, well, how about actually dealing with contemporary history? In other words, that you're going to discuss the issue of the British decision to remain at the EU or to break away from the EU. It's too early to go into that. And then he said, well, if not, then probably you're going to deal with US elections, particularly the whole issue of security, what happened in the United States, Orlando and elsewhere, and the gun control issue. And against the background that one of our colleagues, Professor Amitai Etzioni, who spoke here, of course, and we know him for decades, received some warnings from extremists on the right, militias, because he wrote an article suggesting that instead of looking at the arms regulations and so on and legislation, we really should have a domestic arms disarmament. He just wrote this, and he received in the social media obviously a lot of reactions, including threatening, which I won't go into details. So in other words, when you speak with colleagues, each one will have their own perspective. And I said, no, we're not going to discuss it this time. Finally, the physics professor was able, since he's a soccer fan and looking all the time at the games, he said, well, since you're dealing with security, you probably are going to deal with soccer security, the European games, and also the Latin American games. And I said, you're getting warmer. We're going to discuss also the Olympics and the issues related to that. So fundamentally, I think when we talk about, I need this PowerPoint just to show, yeah.
What will you do with that?
Well, I will tell you later. I hope it works. There it is. Okay. Now, just for the audience, particularly young people, when you deal with the subject academically, it's not hocus pocus winning, that you have to really invest a great deal of study over the years. So I think we dealt with Latin America for many years. This is just a laundry list of some of the topics that we discussed, and obviously we cannot cover each and every one adequately, do justice, but they're all interrelated one way or another, and we'll have opportunity to discuss it during the Q&A session. The other area, of course, is the Olympics. Right here, just for our young students to get some idea that I think we had to deal with this going all the way back in my particular small way, in 1972 in Munich, Germany, and then looking also the Moscow event, which is related to Afghanistan. I won't go into all that now, and South Korea, and then also in Brazil in 2005 in terms of the games there, and so on. And now, of course, the Rio discussions. And obviously, we're dealing with the comprehensive counter, I think, terrorism, if you will, or insurgency, or security issues. So, again, when we are going to focus on Latin America, I just want to remind all of us that you cannot possibly look at one region without looking at the interregional connections. And in this particular case, of course, Africa, which has to do with the narco trafficking and munitions and guns and so on and so forth. But at any rate, also in terms of the infectious diseases, all the way from Ebola now to the Zika. So with this very brief remarks, I would like to invite our keynote speaker today to provide a general, I think, context to our discussion. You have the bios of the speakers in front of you, so I won't go into it in the interest of time, but you can see that they had a very rich background in diplomacy as well as in U.S. Congress and the private sector academically, and he was obviously recognized for his many contributions and awarded with medals or whatever prizes that were available in the region and beyond the region.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I've been fiddling with my phone to figure out how I can set the timer to cut me off at 15 minutes, but then the thing locks automatically, and so I'll be fiddling with my phone if I mess with it. I appreciate the opportunity. Dr. Alexander's speculated that I was to the right of him. Let me confirm, I'm probably to the right of everyone here, politically speaking. Maybe not everybody, but
That doesn't make you wrong.
no, it doesn't, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I appreciate the opportunity. I wouldn't say that I'm going to talk in general terms, because I quite frankly want to drill down to some specifics about some of the challenges that we face. But let me just say at the outset that, of course, everyone wishes the Brazilians well as they go about hosting the world in Rio. And I know, I remember being in Rio right after the Brazilians won that right to host the Olympics, and I was struck by the level of skepticism among Cariocas about whether they could pull this off. And when they saw the very ambitious videos that the host committee had produced as part of their bid, the Brazilians were sort of stunned with the ambition that was reflected in whether they could pull off the kind of transportational, logistical improvements, and then, quite frankly, the building of some of these massive facilities. And let me just say that we're all speculating the same about whether they could pull off the World Cup. And I think, aside from their own poor performance, I think it was a great world event, and I think the Brazilians deserve a lot of credit for pulling that off. And I know we wish the very best for them as they face this challenge. And I want to talk a little bit about some of these kind of random security challenges that are unleashed in this hemisphere by a lawlessness, transnational organized crime, by the adventurism of Iran and its cat's paw, the Hezbollah terrorist group, and how these groups somewhat work together in a systematic way to gather the resources that they need to carry out their activities. And I think that this is unfortunately an area that has been largely, well, not ignored completely, but downplayed. And certainly in the context of trying to reach an agreement on the nuclear accord, this administration very systematically downplayed what the Iranians might be up to here in our hemisphere. But I'm going to bring some of this to light, and some of it will quite frankly surprise you, I would think. We don't have the kinds of intelligence resources that we need in this hemisphere, because after 9/11, so many of the resources were shifted to other parts of the world. And we just have a blind spot. I even talked years ago with my Israeli friends from folks in the government who were frankly shocked by some of the assertions that we've been making about Iran's engagement in the hemisphere, and in particular the fact that they were abetted in this exercise by the regime of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. They were surprised because, of course, for them, Venezuela was always a friendly country. We can pretty much remember that ourselves, but that's history. And I think that you've had an inadequate or disoriented foreign policy that favors stability, even when that means keeping in power a narco state that is hostile to our interests, and which also is a longstanding ally of some terrorists that are carrying that threat, that asymmetrical threat, into our hemisphere. Those of you who may underestimate this or may not understand exactly what Iran's reach is in the hemisphere should study the case of Alberto Nisman, the Argentine prosecutor who is looking into the 94 bombings of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, the 92 bombing of the Israeli embassy. And specifically, he was looking at the collusion between Argentine authorities with the Iranians to do away with the investigation, with some Interpol notices that had been brought against Iranian officials by various prosecutors that were preventing these people from traveling, and which was pretty much a black eye. And they wanted to launder that image, and they found in Christina Kirchner and her foreign minister, Hector Timmerman, allies. And quite frankly, they may have exchanged money in that process. Well, not exchanged, but funneled money into the pockets of some of these people. And Alberto Nisman was about to hold a very important press conference. He'd briefed the media on it. He had talked to allies in the Congress who were looking at that. And unfortunately, he didn't make his press conference because someone put a bullet in his head. And it was supposedly, clearly set up to be a suicide, purported to be a suicide in his locked apartment. But it's easy to check that someone accessed his laptop after he was probably dead, supposed to be dead. And found in a safe deposit box months after his death a plea to Argentine officials that they take the AMIA terrorist investigation to the United Nations and say, look, the Iranians have obviously violated all of their international agreements by committing this terrorist act on our territory, and we need the United Nations to engage to confront the Iranian threat. I have talked to, I met Nisman over the years a good number of times, probably back when he first took this inquiry, took on this responsibility. And I told him, this guy who's an investigator, you can't be using a Yahoo account for your communications. And he didn't understand what he was up against. And I had a source that spoke with Nisman who told me that intelligence folks that were cooperating with him were told that Kirchner's government had told intelligence people loyal to the regime to give the Iranians everything they want on Nisman. and that was before he died, or before he was killed. And Joseph Umide just recently published a report on this. Humire, Humire, by the way, trained as a Marine, who's now who's now doing terrific work with an NGO called Secure and Free Society. And he just published a report on this that recounts the level of collusion between a member, a state, with the Iranians covering up an act of terror. I've testified on this. By the way, Joseph also called me a few months ago and said, I hear the Iranians on some wiretaps that Nisman did during the course of his investigation. He says, I can hear the Iranians talking about Raja Noriega. Because in 2011, I testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, or one of the committees up there, and asserted that someone implicated in those bombings, Mohsen Rabbani, an Islamic cleric, an Iranian cleric, who was cultural attaché in Buenos Aires at the time of the bombings, was traveling frequently in and out of the hemisphere on false documents provided by the Venezuelans. Actually, not false documents, authentic, but phony documents, so that he could evade the Interpol red notices on travel and be able to come in and cultivate that network of terrorists that he had created when he was signed in Buenos Aires in the 1990s. Apparently, they were not talking about killing me, although some people, I've gotten a few Twitter threats, but there's people exercising their internet muscles. But a genuine terrorist like Ghaziatef Nesraddin Abu Ali. You might be surprised if you hear that name that he is a Venezuelan diplomat. He came when he was probably 11 or 12 to Venezuela after having been born in Lebanon. He's an operative of Hezbollah. He was assigned, he was a diplomat, access, and there's photographs of him with Nicolas Maduro when Maduro was foreign minister. Maduro is now the president of Venezuela, but check your watches because his days are numbered as well. But this guy and his brother and his father, radical anti-Semites, activists of Hezbollah, doing fundraising in Venezuela, training of operatives in Venezuela, money laundering activities from which Hezbollah accrued millions of dollars, an operative of the Venezuelan state. He tweeted me that if I were a terrorist, I would cut your tongue out. So I think, lucky for me, he's not a terrorist, I guess. This is a guy who was assigned at the Venezuelan embassy in Damascus, and eyewitnesses say that he was providing visas and documents for people to travel to Venezuela from Syria. An eyewitness who's now still alive and I think is cooperating with U.S. authorities. But the U.S. government has known this. We've known this for years. Nasruddin was on an OFAC list in 2007. And so I guess they could say, well, he's on our radar screen, but they haven't done anything substantial to stop his activities, and nor the activities of Mohsen Rabbani, whose brother, by the way, lived in Brazil. I think he might have relocated, but he ran a center in Brazil, as well as other countries. And I mentioned that he traveled. One of our sources say, and actually there were a series of people who were eyewitnesses to meetings. What were the bombings in Buenos Aires all about? You may recall that Carlos Menem, the former president of Argentina, cut off Argentina's nuclear cooperation with Iran. They had similar sorts of nuclear reactors, and they were providing technological support. And Nestor Kirchner, former president of Argentina, was approached by Hugo Chavez, his good buddy, anti-American ally, and said, hey, you know, the Iranians would like you to turn back on that cooperation. Would you consider it? We presented, my group acquired information from within Venezuela, documentation at the same time of these conversations. We have eyewitnesses saying these conversations happened, and then documentation with Hugo Chavez's signature saying transfer $250 million to the Argentines to support Argentine Iranian social programs in Venezuela, building, you know, refrigeration for vegetables and houses, projects that were never executed, but a $250 million transfer to Buenos Aires to people in Venezuela, authorized by Hugo Chavez. We had his signature there. We took it to the Congress. Ileana Ros-Lehtinen wrote the State Department, said, what do you make of this? And they answered within 10 days, saying there's nothing to it. That's not a serious inquiry. She asked for an investigation. Nothing to it. By the way, they don't answer mail. You know, they don't answer mail. When I was on Capitol Hill and also in the State Department, we had these were called red borders. When a congressional letter came, you had to answer that mail within a week. And if you didn't, you have to explain to somebody a lot higher up why it wasn't answered. They don't answer mail anymore. I think Bush stopped too. But they don't answer letters unless they want to. And in this case, the State Department said there's nothing to this, rushing to do this. Now, Jeff Duncan, about 3 or 4 years ago, a congressman from South Carolina, introduced legislation requiring the State Department to do a report on Iran's influence in Latin America. They missed the deadline by a little bit and then turned in a 5-page report that said, not much happening, and guess what? Its influence is waning. You know, this is, again, not a serious effort. There was testimony at the time. All of the private witnesses said this report could have been written by an intern. No disrespect to interns. And more to the point, agencies within the U.S. government said, our views are not reflected in that report. Our concerns in terms of narco-trafficking, trafficking in persons, the Iranians using their relationship with Venezuela to launder tens of billions of dollars in transactions to evade the international financial sanctions that were in place at the time. None of those issues were reflected in that report. And so that's a significant blind spot, and it's a willful blind spot. And I would suggest that, you know, as I have said publicly, that if we don't get our arms around this problem, we don't appreciate this problem, you're going to see a terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere sponsored by these people. And it's going to be against our interests, our people, or against our allies and in our neighborhood. And that is, you know, a blood-curdling prospect as the world meets in Rio. So I'm going to stop right there. I have tons more detail, but I'm not going to bore everybody with these details. Yes. Yeah.
No. Okay. Can I?
Yes.
Of course, this case study of the Army is very important. It's really a test in terms of how the security apparatus really works, and has very grave implications, not only regionally but globally. Let me ask you another related question in terms of the tri-border area, in other words, area not under control of the 3 countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, but my question is this the Lebanization of parts of Latin America?
Yes.
In terms of the Hezbollah and so on.
Well, it's interesting. I made my first trip to the tri-border area probably in '95, and it's fascinating. You can go there and you can have a full Florida driver's license in about 30 minutes. You don't necessarily have to ever have been in Florida, don't get me, but you can get an authentic Florida driver's license. Now, everyone sort of downplays this, and with all due respect, the Brazilians, I think this whole thing is a bit of an area where they don't like to talk publicly, acknowledge a serious problem. I hope there's a level of cooperation privately where they can talk about these things. But that tri-border area is an area it's a finger of territory that reaches in with Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. At the time I first went there, the Argentines were the only ones who sort of took this seriously. I've done some work on this and sent some people to Brazil to talk to some people about some of these things that we've talked about with Mohsen Rabbani's involvement, his travel to Brazil. And a Brazilian official said to our researcher, who, by the way, wasn't an American citizen and spoke perfect Portuguese, said, oh, this terrorism thing is just invented by the Americans to muck around in our internal affairs. So there's a bit of a blind spot in terms of that. But I remember this after 9/11, and when we went into Afghanistan, and the camera is panning in this room, a Taliban facility, very rough room, but decorated on the wall was see the Falls of Iguazu. In other words, a tri-border area. Kind of a chilling thing. And so there is a serious problem. What I would suggest, though, is Margarita Island is even worse now, because Margarita Island is off the coast of Venezuela, Venezuelan territory, friendly state to terrorists, and we had access to information about trainers there, Hezbollah trainers who were doing operational training. Shared this with some of our Israeli friends and said these guys are serious characters, and they're not there doing proselytization. They're talking about operations in our hemisphere. And so that is that I think would be an even bigger problem.
Mr. Ambassador, I know nothing about Olympics or security.
Yep.
What do you think, what are the patterns? In other words, as the Brazilians began to organize to prepare for the Olympics, do they have intelligence people who consult the United States and otherwise and get themselves really organized to protect the Olympics?
Yes. We're talking about a very sophisticated government, sophisticated capabilities. So when I say there's a blind spot, among certain people, and they certainly don't want to talk about it publicly. Foreign ministry people, God bless them, it's the same with ours too. It's like nothing to see here. But I would have to say, some of the information that you see in public record, the sources are the federal police of Brazil. They know what's going on in their territory. They have very fine appreciation for what's happening in their country. I hope the level of cooperation is significant enough that we're sharing lists, no-fly lists, and things of that nature. But it doesn't always work that way, and sometimes politics intervenes. I was in Chile about 6 or 7 years ago. There was a man, I don't remember the name now, who was detained in trying to get a U.S. visa at our embassy in Santiago with traces of bomb-making material on his hands. So they arrest him. The Chileans put him away for several months. People started to protest and all. And the Chilean Minister of Interior at the time was saying, can you help me? I'm at this point the former U.S. Assistant Secretary by about 5 or 6 years. Can you help me find out what this guy was doing here? Because his ticket to Santiago was purchased in cash in Los Angeles. And I'm not getting, and the FBI is not sharing significant information. Well, I bring this up because that man was eventually released, and he traveled to Turkey after a stop in Brazil. And the United States, the U.S. officials, law enforcement, asked the Brazilians, we want to talk to him before he goes to Turkey, and they said no. So, there's some, obviously there are gaps in our cooperation. There's a level of sophistication in our government, it boggled my mind, I work in this area, but it would boggle my mind everything the United States government knows. Brazilians have a significant intelligence capability. I just think sometimes politics intervenes, sometimes the priorities intervene. You don't want to be the host country of the World Cup and the Rio Olympics and tell everybody that you think there's terrorism problems. You want to say everything is great, or that we have things taken care of, and one of those things is probably true.
So we'll come back to
Okay,
some
pleasure.
some
Thank you.
issues.
Thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks.
We'll move on with our panel. As I indicated, each one will speak initially for about 5 minutes to provide some sort of context, and we'll develop a discussion. Professor Gary Simon, please, if you don't mind.
So I do infectious diseases. There's nothing better than infectious disease. We get new stuff all the time. There's nothing new in cardiology, for example. Okay, so a little bit about, you probably know most of what I'm going to say. Zika virus was discovered in the late 40s at the Zika forest outside in Uganda, outside of Entebbe. It was discovered in a monkey. I don't think there was a human case until 1952. We probably wouldn't even be hearing much about it, at least the general public, if it wasn't for what was happening recently, because it was just a mild viral infection. You're better in a week, and that's the end of it. It's spread by mosquitoes. Why did God make mosquitoes? I mean, think about this all the time. I mean, they feed bats and they feed some birds, but what's the most common lethal infectious disease in the world? Does anybody know? Malaria. Mosquitoes. St. Louis encephalitis, La Crosse encephalitis, Eastern equine, Western equine encephalitis, going on and on. Not too many good things that I can think about. Okay, anyhow, mosquitoes. So the virus is spread by mosquitoes. It was limited to first East Africa. It did spread a bit to West Africa. It spread to Southeast Asia. There was an outbreak in Thailand. It spread to Micronesia, and it appeared to have mutated a bit there because there were some complications in Micronesia, on Yap Island and places that hadn't been seen or hadn't been recorded before. And that was primarily Guillain-Barré syndrome, which we'll talk about in a second. And then it spread to the Americas, and there were more complications. It's not clear that there was any further mutation in the spread from Micronesia to the Americas, but that's not 100% clear at this point. There are several problems besides the really awful complications of Zika. First, it's a very hard diagnosis to make. Fever, rash, arthralgias, conjunctivitis. It is almost indistinguishable from dengue, which is very common in the Caribbean and South America, and chikungunya, which was a Southeast Asian virus, which is also spread. There's a little bit more arthralgias and muscle aches in dengue and chikungunya, and a little bit more rash in Zika. But just looking at a patient, it's hard to call the difference. And as I'll come to, there's really no good test, at least no simple good test to distinguish one from the other. So the diagnosis is actually can be made, and there's been some ads, you see that Quest Laboratories has a commercial test that they send to Focus Laboratory. The test is a test for the presence of virus in the blood, which means they can pick it up within 7 days of onset of illness. Well, most people who have been to the Caribbean and are worried that they might have had Zika are coming in more than 7 days after they got sick. And 80% of people who have Zika are asymptomatic. So we don't know if an asymptomatic patient is more or less likely to, asymptomatic pregnant woman is more or less likely to transmit the disease to the fetus and to lead to the complications, the subsequent complications. So it's clearly a devastating illness when you get the complications. If you just get Zika and you get better, that's the end of it. There's nothing to worry about. Obviously, microcephaly is a devastating complication. Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome, for those, maybe everybody knows about it, but it's an ascending paralysis. Sensation is intact, but you get a paralysis that usually begins in the lower extremities and travels up and occasionally involves the cranial nerves such that you have to go on a respirator. Most people who have Guillain-Barré syndrome get better. but it's a slow process and can take weeks to months. There is some treatment for Guillain-Barré syndrome. That is, we run your blood through a filter. It's called plasmapheresis. We take off the offending, in this case, antibody, and people get better faster. Or we can give you intravenous immunoglobulin and people get better. Right now, there's no treatment for Zika virus infection, and it's not clear that if we had a treatment, if it would alter the subsequent outcome. People would get better, but at what point in the course of the illness does the virus cross the placenta, and at what point in the course of the illness do the antibodies develop that you would get Guillain-Barré syndrome? And the antibody issue is a really critical question. The reason it's such a critical question is we know that the microcephaly is caused by direct viral invasion into the central nervous system. That is, you get an infection in the brain of the fetus. Now, there's a general belief that microcephaly is not the whole story for the fetus, and that there may be more subtle changes, and we may not pick these up for a couple of years. There could be some cognitive changes. It's still unknown. Guillain-Barré is different. Guillain-Barré is caused by an antibody that binds to the nerve, binds to the peripheral nerves. And that then damages the peripheral nerves, and you get this ascending paralysis. Why that is so critical is we're trying to develop a vaccine. But if the vaccine produces an antibody that is identical to the antibody that binds to the peripheral nerves, we have a disaster. So that's a really critical issue. Now, we actually have a grant into NINDS to look at that particular issue, and hopefully they'll fund it. We don't know yet. But that's a critical issue in development of antibody. And there's always some anxiety about a new vaccine. Now, if you remember, if you're old enough, when was Jerry Ford president?
Jerry Ford, 1972 to 76.
Okay.
73 to 76.
When Jerry Ford was president, there was an outbreak of swine flu at Fort Dix in New Jersey. Swine flu is what happened in 1918 when 50 million people died in the world. So this was a big panic, and they got the vaccine for that particular swine flu, and we gave the vaccine across the country. And there was an outbreak of Guillain-Barré syndrome, the same thing, associated with that influenza vaccine, that particular vaccine. And by the way, the swine outbreak never got out of Fort Dix. But because of that, which is 40 years ago or so, it still says, don't take influenza vaccine if you're worried if it may have had Guillain-Barré, and people are worried they might get Guillain-Barré. It's never happened since, but it was that one single strain. So we're very nervous. We are concerned about a vaccine for Zika and the potential for an adverse effect associated with that vaccine because it has this neurologic, this vaccine, this antibody-mediated reaction. Rio. Mosquitoes like temperatures above 80 degrees. The median high temperature in Rio in August is 78 degrees. I'm not sure how sensitive the mosquitoes are to that difference between 78 and 80, and I'm not so sure if median temperature is it's going to stay at the medium or below. If it goes below 60 degrees, nothing to worry about. But there is a concern. The mosquitoes are not as prevalent in Rio as they are in northeastern Brazil, which is equatorial. And it won't be as bad, but it's a concern. So, and everybody's read about some athletes dropping out. What about DEET? We all know about DEET. Smear your body with DEET, the mosquitoes stay away. Well, one of my colleagues went down to Colombia. We're collaborating with the Colombians, where there's a lot of Guillain-Barré. And she came back on a plane with two other people, and she said she was covered with DEET. And on the plane, covered with DEET. D-E-T. Oh, everybody know what DEET is? DEET, you buy DEET, it's supposed to keep the mosquitoes off you.
Is it a spray of some kind?
A spray, or this was a liquid, you can put the liquid on you.
Don't drink it.
No, you don't drink it. You can get 25% DEET in sprays. If you really want, you get 40% DEET at REI. Okay, if you go to Wisconsin, use DEET, because the state bird of Wisconsin is a mosquito. But she was covered with DEET. She said, I had plenty of Zika. And the mosquitoes were biting her on the plane. And the person she came back to tested positive for Zika, one of her colleagues. So I don't know about DEET anymore. I used to rely on it. So whether Rio is going to be a problem or not depends on the temperature in Rio, as well as a number of other factors. But I don't think it's 100% safe, and I would certainly not recommend anybody who's pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant or thinking about impregnating their wife going there. We think it lasts in women, well, we have some data that the organism can be in women for 8 weeks and in men for 6 months, but I don't know what the outside limit of that is. Is it really only 8 weeks? Is it really only 6 months? We just don't have the data. And modeling. One of the things that people like to do, I don't know, I say something negative about the CDC right now. They like to model. They like to model what the potential infection is going to be, how many patients are going to get infected, what's the risk factor, and so on. When they modeled Ebola in September, they said by January there could be as many as 1.4 million cases of Ebola virus. Okay? By the time the epidemic ended, there were 28,000, of which only 16,000 were proven Ebola. I don't know how bad this is going to get. I don't know if we're going to see endemic transmission in the United States. That is, for endemic transmission means somebody who has Zika lands in Miami, the mosquito in Miami bites them, and then bites somebody else. It's bloodborne transmission, primarily some sexual transmission. I don't know if it's in blood bank. I don't know if there's any evidence that it is or isn't in blood bank. I don't know. It is?
Zika?
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Oh, wait.
Absolutely.
Jerry's going to tell us. Okay. So I don't know. Right now, there's an estimate that somewhere between 1% and 13% of women who are infected will transmit to the fetus. Now, I think it depends a great deal on when they're infected. First trimester, second, third trimester, and so on. First trimester obviously carries the highest risk of microcephaly. There have been 117, as of last week, there were 117 births from Zika-infected women in the United States, of which there were 6 cases of Zika malformations, so roughly 5%. But these are small numbers, and remember, 80% are uninfected, are asymptomatic. So we don't begin to know what the numerator really is, what the denominator really is, and it's too early to even call the numerator with only 6 infections. So is it going to be 1% or 13%, or I've seen a number 29% in the first trimester, which I doubt. I think the data in Brazil is quoting the 13% figure, but the chance to get an accurate denominator, that is how many people have been infected and been asymptomatic and not been tested in Brazil, we just don't have good data on that. So clearly the complication is devastating, but for us to sit down and say, this is how many people are going to get it, it's going to be an endemic disease, we're going to get it in the United States, certainly you have to worry about it, but I don't think we have any real data to support it. The mosquitoes that transmit it in this hemisphere, it was Aedes africanus in Africa, but in this hemisphere it's Aedes aegypti, which is the primary one, which doesn't quite make it up to where we live, and Aedes albopictus, which is a secondary one, which makes it up to Maine. So yes, there's risk. So if you have a bird bath at home, empty it, because they like standing water. Of course, they like standing water for West Nile and everything, all those other mosquito-borne illnesses. So we have a very little bit of data. It is certainly devastating for the pregnant woman. It may be devastating or may be very serious for people who get the Guillain-Barré syndrome, because most patients recover, but not all of them. And we have to watch this. And certainly the future is a vaccine. One thing about diagnosis. I said the test will pick it up in the first 7 days, and that's true. It detects the virus in the blood. Normally, after the first 7 days, it's out of the virus, it's out of the blood. So we do antibody testing. Now, everybody in this room has antibody to measles, okay? We have antibodies to mumps and rubella and a variety of other things. It turns out that the antibody to Zika, and what you look for is what's called an IgM antibody, because that's the one that tells you acute disease. The antibody to Zika looks so similar to the antibody to dengue that unless you do some very elaborate testing, you can't tell the difference. So the elaborate testing is called a plaque reduction neutralization test, which we're actually doing as part of the research project, but it's so labor intensive that no commercial lab is going to do it. So if somebody's 10 days out and they think they might have had Zika, there's almost no way to pick it up, for sure, unless unless it goes to the CDC, which is doing that test, and the CDC is inundated with them. One last political thing. The CDC I forget what it was, on a Wednesday came out and said, we're only going to test symptomatic patients, symptomatic women, in an effort to limit it. And 80% are asymptomatic. And I thought, this is crazy, because we have people coming in. And so I called the congressman from my district in Bethesda, and I told the story. And on Friday, the CDC was checking asymptomatic women. So sometimes they do something right. They listened. Questions?
We'll have later on.
Okay, okay.
Another question, but
Okay.
Dr. Sandler, maybe you have a second opinion? By the way, in the interest of sport, Jerry, I have this yellow card, so beware.
I'm colorblind when it comes to standing in front of a microphone.
Yeah, that's
I'll fix you.
Okay, I'm the blood doctor, and whenever we experience a new epidemic, as you just heard from Dr. Gary Simon, one of the first questions that people ask is, what do I do if I need a blood transfusion? And as Dr. Simon asked me, is this an infection that is transmitted from an infected person to a transfusion recipient? The answer to that is clearly yes. It's at least 40 or 50% effective, but since we don't have a real good test and there's very little information, that number is not a very strong number, but it's clearly an infection that is transmitted by blood, and there are cases that are neatly observed. So the questions that come up with regard to security and the safety of a blood transfusion in the Summer Olympics in Rio are: one, will Brazilian authorities take the initiative of testing their local supply of blood for the Zika virus using an investigational level test? Because as you just heard, there is no reliable, easy kit commercially available on the market that would be easy. The issue of blood, if you think about blood doesn't treat any disease, it supports the whole thing. So when we're looking at should the blood supply be tested, let's say for Zika, we're looking at a small segment within the whole question of dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever, HIV, all of the things that are down there. And we got that diagram, but then we got the big one, the whole healthcare issue. How do we prioritize that? And the second question is it feasible to consider applying the CDC and FDA recommendation that they have issued for the United States? For the United States, the CDC recommendation is as follows. In an area that there is active mosquito-borne transmission of Zika virus, and we don't have it yet in the United States, but it's coming. When that happens, the plan will be to import blood from regions of the United States that don't have active mosquito-borne transmission. So that's pretty simple. Is it in any way feasible to consider applying that CDC recommendation for the United States and bring it to Brazil and say, well, there's active mosquito-borne infection in Rio, let's ship them a supply of blood from Maine, Minnesota, somewhere where there is none. And I was contemplating that 2 days ago when I and every hospital in the United States, I guess, got a letter from the Senior Vice President of the American Red Cross. And what that says is that blood suppliers across the United States, including the American Red Cross, are right now in June experiencing significant blood shortages, and it's expected to pervade throughout the entire summer. I direct the transfusion service at Georgetown University Hospital. I can tell you we're counting the units on the shelf last night because we were right down, and no one on the end of the phone said, I can ship you a replacement. So we're already at borderline levels in the nation's capital. We make it, it's close, but there's no way that you could take a significant supply of blood out of the United States today and send it to Rio, and I would be the guy to lie right down and say, you better keep what people in this community are giving to help our sick people here, because we're very borderline, and we're not going to be shipping it outside and risk our own patients. In short, we are dealing with a small segment of a larger issue of the safety of blood and a much larger issue of how the Brazilians manage their healthcare system. And there's no evidence, and I have my ear to the ground on this, that they're planning to take an investigational test and test all of the blood that might be needed for individual cases, and there will be individual cases of people in Rio who are going to need a transfusion. You count the number of people, count the incidence of transfusions that are given to a population. There are some people, not very many, but you can predict there will be some. And then, of course, there's just no way to have a large enough supply pre-tested in the event of an unexpected, but what we're here to consider, terrorist activity with mass casualties. We can't bring the American standard to Rio. I think that's really where that is. I think of the ugly American who went into a hotel in Rome, and everything that was different from the United States said, gee, you know, we do it different in the States, and that's what I want. If you want to go to Rio, go to Rio. And Rio is going to remain Rio as far as blood and health care is concerned. I can't predict that Rio is going to become Washington, D.C. for a period of time in August. It's going to stay where it is, and if you want to go to Rio for Rio. Unless something that's beyond my vision is going to happen, I think we can expect the status quo as it exists in the healthcare system, and with specific reference to blood safety, as it is for the locals in Rio and for any of the people who decide to be there as participants in the Summer Olympics.
Thank you very much. That's for George?
It's so overcast outside, so I thank you all for staying awake for all of this. I am Asha George. I'm the co-director for the Blue Ribbon Study Panel for Biodefense. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the study panel, because I think it's worthwhile understanding it in a non-academic context. We pulled together the Blue Ribbon Study Panel on Biodefense because we felt that it had been a while since a commission of any sort had really evaluated the state of biodefense in the United States of America. We do not have a congressional mandate. We did not get congressional funding or governmental funding, otherwise. There's a bunch of former Capitol Hill and White House staff who came together and said, this is something we think we need to do, where we're all biodefense experts, but we decided we wanted to do this, and we did. After we made that decision, we went and got co-chairs to be Senator Lieberman and former Secretary of Homeland Security and Governor Tom Ridge. We have Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, former Homeland Security Advisor Ken Weinstein, and former Representative Jim Greenwood, who are all members of the panel. We also have some ex officios, including Dr. Alexander, and institutional sponsorships or support from Hudson Institute, Potomac Institute, and the Yonah University Center. Now, I'm only bringing this up not because it's so vastly exciting to hear about how, you know, we brought it together administratively, so much as to encourage people who are here that have issues in this arena and other arenas that they think are important to get a group of people together and figure out whether you can attract enough luminaries to address an issue the way we did. It was possible for us, and I think it's possible for you as well. So that's my little rah-rah pitch about that. Now, the study panel examined biodefense in the United States of America, looking across a broad set of activities. We went all the way from prevention, including intelligence activities and diplomatic activities, all the way over to response and recovery and mitigation and law enforcement and attribution, all of that stuff. So as you can imagine, it was just this huge group of activities, all kinds of things to look at. We released a report in October of 2015, which has 33 recommendations and 50 very specific action items. Now, we have academics here, UPMC is here, the military, you know, is represented, and we have a lot of activity going on in the academic and other than non-governmental, realms. Why did we need a commission other than to assess the situation? And what I would say is, with us, we very much, given our own backgrounds, in Congress and in the White House and in the executive branch otherwise, we really wanted to focus on how does government facilitate actually defending the United States against something, and in this case it was the biological threat. How well are we doing that? So our recommendations are different than what you usually find in the academic arena. And as a result, they were, as we would have expected, of great interest to Congress and to the White House and to the legislative branch, or the executive branch, excuse me, because the way we wrote these, it was very easy for them to take a recommendation and say, oh, okay, now I know how to write about this in legislation. I think this is really important because in this arena, there's so much in it, and there's so much in the way of blind spots that it's very, people may want to address it and then they don't know how to address it, and it gets exhausting, and then they give up and they say, okay, we're gonna go focus over here because nuclear is a big deal and we all understand it. It's a challenge, and in order to get people to do something about it, what we have found is you have to get really specific and say, this is exactly what we recommend that you do about it, and then have a conversation at that level. So I just want to bring up just a few points for you all to consider. This issue of blind spots that the ambassador brought up, I would tell you, like, the whole realm of biodefense seems to be a blind spot. But it's really fascinating when you start looking at, from an academic perspective, how different things overlap and how rapidly something like biodefense becomes very complicated. We have all kinds of activity going on in this one arena that we don't understand. We don't understand the nature of the diseases necessarily that we're dealing with. We don't know where all the biological agents were that were produced by former biological warfare programs elsewhere in the world. We are watching things like antibiotic resistance occur. We know in the scientific community we're already ourselves modifying organisms. There's so much of that going on. But in addition, we also have other things happening. So if we just as one small example with counterfeit pharmaceuticals. In many countries, counterfeiting is not an issue for them. It's not illegal for them. They encourage it. They think it's the way to go. Why? Because they don't want to counterfeit and like kill people. That's not their issue. It's that they're trying to get ahead in terms of the science, and they're taking something that already exists and saying, okay, go copy it. Go do this, go copy it. Now you can tell from a health perspective, this is not something we want to see happen, but when you have countries that have those kinds of vastly different perspectives on something like counterfeiting, how you even have a conversation about that is an enormous challenge. And that's just one thing that has something to do with biodefense. Now, the other issue I want to bring up just quickly has to do with intelligence and the intelligence enterprise. We have a tendency to think that every threat to the United States is addressed equally and as well as every other threat, and that's not the case. And not just with biological issues, but also with some others, especially when they begin to get very technical and the fields are moving fast. We recognize, I think as a country and as a government, we recognize, of course, there are challenges and weaknesses and gaps and all of that, and we take steps to address those. So, for example, with the Western Hemisphere, the intelligence community said, we are kind of weak on this. We're hearing from the State Department and the Defense Department. We need some emphasis here. So they created something called the National Intelligence Manager for the Western Hemisphere, which is great, and allowed for some additional focus. Now, I'm sure the ambassador would say, it's not perfect and it hasn't, addressed every single problem, but at least it went up another level, and someone in the intelligence community, in the name of the Director for National Intelligence, said, "Hey, we need some additional focus." So we're advocating the same thing as far as the biological threat is concerned. Now, I think that we have to get to the point, and one of the things that the study panel argues is that we have to get to the point where we develop processes and changes in our culture, both inside the government and outside the government, to deal with really messy, complicated, gap-filled challenges like the biological threat and like others. We have to get to that point. Otherwise, we'll just keep backing off and focusing on something else until something comes up, like Zika or Ebola or whatever else. I don't think we can keep going down that path over and over and over again. When we look at Zika, we just heard the history of Zika. We didn't just discover it last week or last month. We have been tracking it for a while. We've known it, we've seen it, we've looked at it, we've identified some aspects of it, not every aspect, but some aspects of it. So we, at the study panel, and you now sitting in the audience, I think we have to ask ourselves, well, why, if we were tracking it all this time, not since last week, not even since last year, but going back decades, why is it that last night Congress passed the emergency supplemental for funding to address Zika? Now, because it's a big emergency. Why did it go that way? And why did it happen with Ebola before that? And why does it happen every year with pandemic influenza when it becomes a big issue that we're all concerned about? Why? Part of it is that I think we're just in the habit as a government in terms of doing that. And part of it is that the trade-offs are exhausting and important. We're not talking about, I don't know, we want to fund bubblegum research this year. I kind of want to, so maybe we should. It's not that. We're talking about big, huge things, big, important priorities that are countering each other and that people are invested in. But when it comes to something like biodefense, I think we have to do better. And a message of the panel would be, we can do better. And I think the last point I'll make in closing, before my next colleague comes up, is just this. As we look forward, first of all, we're talking about Zika and we're talking about the Olympics today. But today we should also be asking what's the next thing coming down the pike, because obviously something else is coming down the pike. It's not, we're done after the Olympics and Zika. Obviously we already know something is coming. So not what is it, but how do we address threats that we know are going to keep coming year after year and perhaps more frequently. I think we have to look ahead and we have to figure out how to take the information we actually already have and address it in advance in a more efficient and effective way so that we can avoid being in this situation all the time. I think one of the tragedies of this disease is that it affects children so much. And as a culture, here in North America and also in Central and South America, the value we place on children is enormous. And it's not to say it's not like that everywhere in the world, but people have different perspectives elsewhere. And because we place so much value on that, because it breaks our heart to see these pictures and to put ourselves in the position of those parents that are going to have to somehow raise these children and deal with their issues. This has become a very emotional issue for us. At the same time, now we have the Olympics, also a very emotional issue for most countries, right? It's a matter of patriotism and everything else. We are lucky from the perspective of dealing with biological threats. We actually are lucky that we have two of these great, big, huge emotions coming together because it's forcing a conversation that doesn't ordinarily occur. But we are already running out of time. That we're talking about it, with the Olympics in less than 2 months, is not the way we should be conducting ourselves as countries and as members of the global community. I think we can do better than this, and I think we have to not only connect to the future but also connect to the past. The United States has been all over Central and South America for many decades. Our special forces folks have been down south for many decades. We need to pull all this experience and information and the relationships we've developed and the science that we have together so that we can develop policy and execute on it, not just for us in the United States, but for the entire hemisphere, if not for the whole rest of the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Tara, set, please.
So I'm Tara Kirksell. I have a background in public health, and as you know from my bio, I was also an Olympic athlete. And actually, I have another perspective. Until I had my baby less than 3 weeks ago, I was also a pregnant woman. So I think that I had that sort of perspective as well. I definitely think that there's a little bit of extra anxiety when thinking about Zika when you're pregnant. I'm also happy to go after Dr. George because I'm with the UPMC Center for Health Security, but we used to be the Center for Biosecurity of UPMC. So I'm really glad that you emphasized the biodefense and biothreat aspect of this and how important it is to really think about these threats in a long-term way so that we can sort of think about these infectious disease events are going to keep happening, and we need to have a strategy to deal with them in the long run instead of sort of saying at the last minute, let's try to take care of this. When you think about Zika, we should have been working on it months and months ago, and the CDC was, but we needed to have more resources. So we need to think about how we're going to do that. But I'm actually going to focus on the whole relationship that people are drawing between Zika and the Olympics. I think it's good for us to talk about that, but a lot of people are actually calling for the Olympics to be postponed or canceled or moved, and I think that's a little silly, honestly. So I think there's sort of this mental disconnect going on, right? The Olympics are so big, and they're such a big deal, and so many people are going to come. This is going to spread Zika all around the world, right? But it's not so big that we can't just cancel it or move it. It's like, it's huge but nimble at the same time, right? I don't think either of those are true. I don't think that the Olympics are a big enough event to sort of cause this global catastrophe on Zika that everyone has been, not everyone, some people have been talking about. I read that the travel to the Olympics represents less than 1% of the travel to all Zika-affected countries. And I also think, you know, the Olympics, when we think about the Olympics, I guess I have a different perspective because I was there and I know all the events that run up to it. But, you know, the diving trials just finished, the swimming Olympic trials are starting on Sunday. There's a whole like series of events that come together to make, you know, the Olympics happen. And then it's not just people having a competition at a venue and then that's it. There are all these other events that are happening locally around that event that are going on with the sponsors and you know, other parties that are doing things together in that area. So the other thing that I wanted to sort of touch on here is sort of balancing risks, right? So we don't really live in a risk-free world, although some of us like to think that we do. You know, we accept some risks. We get in a car and we drive and we accept that, you know, there's a possibility of a car crash, right? But there are certain things that make people perceive risks as more serious than others, right? This is risk perception theory, and one of those things is threats to future generations. So that's one of the reasons why Zika really pushes people's buttons, why people get really concerned about it, because it is a threat to unborn children. But I think that in public health, there's a lot of push to sort of go with an abundance of caution, right? That phrase, abundance of caution, personally, I feel like if you hear it, it's usually like a cover for doing something dumb. So it's like saying, well, this action isn't really warranted by science, but we're going to do it anyways just because. And I don't think that that is really, you know, do things that make sense, do things that the science calls for, and then stop there. I talked a little bit about, you know, the anxiety that I had when I was pregnant, that, you know, even though the risk was tiny, I will say that I still was worried. I still had that risk perception, you know, elevation, because, you know, I was worried, you know, like the tiny chance that I might get bit by a mosquito that probably, like, that had a minuscule chance of having bitten someone else who had Zika, you know, but I was worried about it anyway. So I understand that concern.
Did you put DEET on yourself?
I did not put DEET on myself. I actually just wore long sleeves and pants. And then there's also my perspective as an athlete, right? So, you know, people would be worried about going to the Olympics and getting Zika. But as we heard from Professor Simon, you know, as a disease, if you're not pregnant, there's not a ton of risk, right? So, and there's not going to be that many pregnant athletes, right? So if you trade all your life for an event and you lived your life in a way to target this one event and you made your life decisions based on this event, I don't really see the value of having someone make a blanket public health decision that sort of takes away your dream, right? Because even if it's delayed, you know, your training schedule is set up, and you know, if you lose your chance pretty much for forever. And, you know, there goes all the last 4 years. So
That's why, you know, whatever his name is, Rory, he was a golfer and he has many other chances.
yes, the Olympics are down on his priority list. He can stay home if he wants and not really care. But anyways, to finish up, I will say, you know, I think, you know, none of this is meant to say that Zika is not a serious concern. It is something that, you know, the world needs to pay attention to and that the U.S. needs to have an appropriate response to. But I would say that, you know, the relationship between Zika and the Olympics and calls for it to be canceled or moved or delayed, I think are a little bit overblown.
You have 5 minutes.
I'll do it in 4.
Maximum.
4. Oh, can I do 4? 4's okay. Okay, good. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very clear that Zika is spreading in America with about 250,000 suspected cases, out of which 8,000 have been confirmed. We also know that only 20% of the cases are symptomatic, so 80%, remember, are asymptomatic. We do not recognize them. We also understand that Brazil has had over or close to 100,000 cases so far, which is a very large number. We also appreciate the fact, and WHO appreciates it, the Olympic Authority appreciates it, that Rio de Janeiro right now is essentially at the heart of this epidemic. These are facts that nobody can deny. We also understand and appreciate that WHO is taking, providing advice to the Olympic Committee and Brazil, specifically in Rio de Janeiro, how to make sure that the disease, the mosquitoes are not there, so the disease is not transmitted. So all of these things are happening. In light of all of that, we have to consider the fact that about 500,000 people are going to be traveling and going to Rio de Janeiro. So there is going to be a lot of travel associated with it. So those are facts that we've got to think about. One of the things that I have learned from my work in infectious diseases is that infectious diseases do not respect boundaries. They have never respected boundaries. So irrespective of whether it's influenza, whether it's West Nile virus, which never used to be in the United States, now is in the United States, or many other diseases, Zika has a very good potential to get to the United States irrespective of the Olympics. And why do I say that? Because there's a lot of travel already. Approximately 400,000 people travel across the Americas on a regular basis. So, and it takes about 8 days to even become symptomatic. So the disease, people can travel and have the disease, and this could cause a major problem. Now, the big concern that I have, and the points that I would like all of you to appreciate, is the situation in the United States of America. We used to have a very strong, long time ago, vector control program. Guess what? Half the country lacks in any kind of vector control right now. Vector control meaning control for mosquitoes, right? So that is a major, major issue. We also, we also know and understand now that the type of mosquito that can transmit this disease is found, without the disease right now, is found in 40 states or the 50 states of the United States of America. So if you put together a map, and on that map you put the type of mosquito that transmit this disease, 40% of America is covered. Remember, most of those states don't have a single person in their counties that does vector control. So there's no way to find out what's going on. In my opinion, the high-risk areas in the United States are southern Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. These are going to be the hot, states where if this disease comes, it's going to spread very quickly. The current surveillance system that we have in place in the United States is absolutely not adequate. It is good for a lot of infectious diseases, but not for vector-borne diseases. We have a system for West Nile disease, which is spread by a totally different kind of a mosquito. So we do have traps for them so that we can identify what's going on in the community, but not for the Zika virus. I'm really glad that the Congress passed this bill last night under all the confusion that was going on, because we definitely need that kind of money to start working on this disease. So most of you, except one person, clearly said that, listen, Olympics are okay. I appreciate that very much. That you came out and said, it's okay, Olympics are not going to cause a problem. They should happen. I agree with you. Yes, there is a risk, but then there's a risk in everything that we do in life. So Olympics should go on as planned, but what is critically needed is that, and needed urgently, is coordination and collaboration in response for prevention of Zika across the world. That is what is needed. Not just Zika, but all the infectious diseases that potentially are emerging. We are talking about Zika because of the sensitivity of the problem with microcephaly and the children that are getting affected by it. Guess which is the more dangerous disease in Rio de Janeiro and Brazil in terms of numbers that is circulating over there? It's called dengue, which causes a bigger problem. So there are more cases of dengue over there than Zika. So it's, what we forget is that there are a lot of diseases out there, and we've got to start working collaboratively and taking a bigger look at what's going on and provide resources, allocate resources together to fight those diseases.
Not one of you has used the letters WHO. I think one person.
I did.
You did.
Yes.
A few thoughts about the WHO and international activity.
So right now, WHO obviously is critically looking at this situation. Again, if something really bad happens in Rio de Janeiro after the Olympics, the agency that is going to be blamed is going to be WHO, because WHO has agreed and said that Olympics should go on, and these are the precautions that need to be taken, and everybody will be okay. So WHO is in pretty hot water right now in terms of what's doing. But more than WHO, one of the other organizations that is really active, which works with WHO, is PAHO, Pan American Health Association. And it's right here in DC. PAHO is doing more work on Zika. If you want to take a look at what's going on in terms of epidemiology, in terms of all the different research, precautionary measures, etc., PAHO would be the PAHO. PAHO would be the website to go to and take a look at that. And with that,
Okay.
I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Did I take more than 4 minutes?
What we're going to do is
It'll be
to
a model for the
ask
future.
each panelist and speaker to comment first on the previous insights, and if not, I have many questions myself and the audience.
Well,
Ambassador?
I would have to say, it seems like I came to the wrong meeting, but I didn't really.
it's not the wrong meeting
Dr. Alexander did ask me to talk specifically about the broader security issues, but I won't take anyone's time. I'll answer questions.
Okay. Go ahead.
At the risk of being inflammatory, WHO is reactive.
Reactive.
They're reactive. They have not, they were late on Ebola, they're late on Zika. Now, I don't disagree that the Olympics should go on. I mean, I think, yes, people have trained for a long time on this. There's no reason why they shouldn't do it. They should understand what the risks are. But there is a risk. It's albeit small. I certainly wouldn't go if I were pregnant. Not likely to happen for me. But yes, I agree with you that it should go on. But I am quite certain, looking at some recent fairs, plane fares, and prices for the Caribbean resorts, you can spend a lot less money going to the Caribbean this year than other years.
Gotcha.
Shall we?
I'm going to ask a question, and I guess it's probably Professor Gary Simon who would be the first person that might want to address this. The epidemiology of the infection in Rio spread would go like this. Someone is in the 20% of the 100%. That is, someone paid a ton of money and got tickets for the whole show and has got 103 degrees and a rash, but, they go. Now, that person is sitting like us, right here. The way the mosquito works, it bites that person, and this particular mosquito is very social. It goes to people right around. It doesn't go home. So I was thinking of, what do we want to do with that person? Do we want to just be silent, as WHO has been until this point? Or do we want to say something or do something? I went to China at the time of the SARS epidemic. And as I came in, as I went out, there was an ultraviolet camera that measured my body temperature. And I was fine. I just went in, went out. But the public health people did grab some people and say, look, you got a high fever, and you're excluded. There is a way of, as people come in and as people go out, of measuring people with the fever. There's also a way of just taking a level below that, just saying, you know, you can hurt people if you have a fever and you have a rash, and we'll refund your ticket price or whatever is involved, but we don't want you to come to the games if you're one of those people who thinks you got bit by a mosquito and 8 days later you got a fever. So at the moment, it's silent. There's no guidance to Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary, if you remember, is the person that spread disease. There's someone out there who could be told, and out of the goodness of that person's feeling for fellows, oh, I didn't really realize that I could hurt other people if I went to the games and I went around. Sure. And if the authorities were good-hearted, they'd say, and you get your money back. Does anyone have an opinion as to whether it's good or bad to stay silent?
Vasily, you want to?
Yeah, I want to say a few things.
Use the mic, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. So, first of all, you know, during the SARS epidemic, the temperature was used, and the untold story is that it was useless.
Yes, it was totally.
It's totally useless. So it's just
Useless?
it did not do anything.
Useless for SARS.
Yes, useless for
It's useless for measuring.
measuring. Yeah, it was so the triage did not work. The second thing that I would like to address when you say that if somebody has a rash or something and wants to go to the Olympics, guess what? Zika is already there. So yes, you are going to increase the number of people that might be carrying that virus in their blood, but Zika is already there. It's not that it's not there. So so that does. Yes, I agree that there might be a way to make sure that people who are coming out of Rio de Janeiro, if there was a protocol in place, and it all depends upon if they show the symptoms, because it takes 8 days perhaps to even have those symptoms to be able to do something about it. So all of these measures that what you've just mentioned, unfortunately, there's no real good science that has shown that any of them will work. I wish they were. I honestly wish they were, but there's nothing that I can say. And perhaps somebody else can tell me I'm wrong on that one.
When Ebola was at its height, there was a Congress at the White House, an African Congress where 2,000 representatives from Africa were coming in. So I was at the White House, and we were figuring out what to do in case. And there was discussion about measuring the temperature of people when they land. And the military said, it doesn't work at all.
It doesn't.
They knew it didn't work.
Ah.
So that disappeared as a thing. By the way, the incubation period is 2 to 3 days. It's gone in 8 days.
Oh, it's gone. Yeah,
It's gone in about 8, usually, longest it stays in the blood is about a week.
Yeah.
So it's gone after 8 days. Now, let's imagine somebody comes out with a rash the day they're leaving. Are we gonna stop them at Dulles, like we tried to do with,
With Ebola.
Yonah, can I say something?
Yeah.
I was whispering to Ambassador Noriega, I'm neither a doctor nor an intelligence officer, nor a Brazilian, nor pregnant. None of my children are either currently. One would like to be. But you know, it seems to me, isn't there an issue of social solidarity? Let me explain it. What I was saying to Noriega was this. You know, there's this terrible problem of these lone wolf, self-radicalizing kids, and their relatives and their parents and their friends, you know, very often they have some sense something is wrong. Now, of course, they don't want to be snitches or tattletales, you know, see something, say something. That goes against the American grain. But, you know, I think that, I would call that a requirement of social solidarity. It strikes me something similar is at work here. If I have a fever, or I feel something's wrong with me, and we're all very self-centered and we all know when something's wrong with us, don't we have a social responsibility in a certain circumstance? Now, I understand these tests may not work, but I think that tends to be forgotten. We're so goddamn individualistic, And I really do think that we got to educate ourselves without thinking we're going to fall into tyranny or, social conformity or all that stuff. I just think we're an ill-formed people by and large, particularly America, which is colossally dynamic, energetic, traveling everywhere. I think that's an issue. I may be wrong.
John?
Yeah, one of our favorite attendees has to
Oh, we have
be, and
questions,
he'd like to
okay.
make a comment before I throw him out.
Thank you, General. Yeah, I listened to all of you, and you just made a case for me that made me worry. I'm a strategic worrier, so, and I'll just kind of go down the points that you made for me and then ask the question. So Ambassador Noriega, you reminded me that, shady things have been going on in South America, and they've been going on a long time. We have a lot of terrorism down there, always had. And maybe a little bit of what's new is that there are stronger connections to the Mideast than probably ever before. And we know there are a lot of terrorist-based organizations in the Mideast. That link is there. There's a lot of reason to expect bad things, I'll just say, and sponsorship of bad things to be coming out of South America through Central America to the U.S. or however that works. And you reminded me of that. Professor Simon, you just reminded me and informed me in some detail how awful the effects of Zika are if in fact somebody suffers from those effects. And they carry with them a little bit of terror themselves. If you had gotten it, that would have been just a horrible life, for you as a mother and for your child as a child. And that's the kind of terror that can just eat at the base of of the social fabric of a society. Professor Sandler, you remind me, and this made me nervous in many different aspects, that the blood transfusion bank, across the country is sort of, like my car, maybe a quarter full, sitting down there. I like to drive around with it, half full at least, but, we're down there. Soon I'm going to be walking, and if I don't get some fuel, and that made me nervous. Asha, Dr. George, good to see you again, and you always just make me feel like, yikes.
Sorry.
Nothing works. Our culture's all hosed, the processes aren't in place.
I did not say
We
that.
gotta look to the future, but you always have a solution behind there that says, if we do this, if everybody gets in line and does a few things, then we can make progress. But you and I know, having been in Washington, D.C. for so long, getting people to do a few things is so hard, and there are so many
Things to be
areas to
done.
do a few things in that is very difficult. Dr. Sell, congratulations on the Olympics, and that's very exciting. And you reminded me that the Olympics are the Olympics, they always have been, and really, they should keep going on as they always have been, because there's always been, a security threat. I mean, since the Olympics in Nazi Germany on through, there's always been security problems.
And a disease threat.
And disease
And
threats,
one.
and all
Yeah.
kinds of threats. And from part of the communities I deal in, are security communities, I will tell you, the executive protection community, that industry is up and high and running right now. The corporate sponsors you talked about are, recruiting executive protection from a lot of the people I know right now. And so the federal government in Brazil and all federal governments, everybody's mustering their security apparatus to provide protection against all the threats, the whole spectrum of threats. And there are many. And Dr. Trotani, I forgot what you reminded me. What did you remind me?
Nothing.
Yeah, you did. You did. I forgot what you reminded me.
Numbers.
Vector control in the United States. Vector control in the United
You
States.
reminded me that nothing, that what they were bragging about didn't work.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what you reminded me. What they were bragging about didn't work. Was putting it all together. If I'm sitting here and I actually am an enemy of the United States, or an enemy of civilized society, or an enemy of organized and orderly people, I think Zika is a good candidate for a weapon. So my question is, how do we weaponize it from an from an adversary's perspective. Can it be weaponized? Can it be weaponized quickly? Do these mosquitoes breed among themselves? Can I create a little, Zika mosquito farm? Can I mass produce these things, and can I target them at the Olympics? And then on the other side of that, what has to be done to detect, counter, protect, prepare, all the rest of it? So from the perspective, we have to worry about weaponizing these things because it sounds like they can be weaponized. That's what I got from you guys.
Thank you very much for your comments.
We're so gloomy.
We do
Summarize what I
have
had.
some other questions right here. We have a representative from Brazil, and I would like to give him the opportunity to speak, to
Now
respond.
get out.
Should we put the mic, should we do the mic?
Yeah, one second. Would you take the mic? No, it's okay. Come. Here, no. Why don't you come up from, let him go in.
From here? Hello? Yes? Yeah.
The other one.
No, that's fine. It doesn't raise your voice, but it
Okay.
records.
Okay.
Speak loud.
First of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, gentlemen and doctors, professors. It's been a pleasure and very enlightening. As a Brazilian, I think I'm a Brazilian diplomat. My name is Erwin Epifano from the Brazilian mission. So I think I should address some things because, Brazil has been mentioned so much here. First of all, it's a big concern, Zika, in my country. But we should remember that Zika is not a Brazilian problem, but it's a hemispherical problem. So we find Zika in all the countries except in Canada. And from our perspective, that 17 million people travel as tourists in the continent, and only 500,000 will come to Rio. And this is very important to take note. I would like to thank Dr. Shotani for mentioning the World Health Organization, which is important to say. And if you allow me, it's a small announcement from a committee. The third meeting of the International Health Regulations Emergency Committee on Zika virus on 14 June, last 14 June, stated that, and I quote, "The committee concluded that there is a very low risk of further international spread of Zika virus as a result of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, as Brazil will be hosting the Games during the Brazilian winter, when the intensity of autochthonous transmission of arbovirus, such dengue and Zika virus, will be minimal and is intensifying vector control measures in and around the venues for the Games, which should further reduce the risk of transmission." So it's important to mention that the WHO is also addressing the problem in Brazil. We're very concerned about pregnant women, pregnant athletes that may go to Brazil. So, but we should consider that the disease itself is very mild. And it's not only Zika, but dengue, chikungunya, and other tropical diseases. It's a tropical country. So we should all consider that. So the Games will be safe, the Games will be great, and you should come to Rio. And just to mention that I checked it now, the temperature in Rio now is 64 degrees. So Fahrenheit, yeah. And I would like just to thank you for all the explanation. And I have a question to Dr. Sandra about, Sandra, thank you, about the investigation test. If you could just mention something about blood investigation test. Thank you.
I think Dr. Simon outlined the basic format. There's two categories of tests that are applied when you have an infectious disease like a virus. The older style, when we had HIV, we waited until the body responded. It made an antibody. There's two kinds of antibodies that it makes, and that takes a period of time, and what we call the window period, where the person is feeling pretty good, but is viremic, that is to say, has the virus there, and then you make the antibody, and then that's detectable. And then that was found with the HIV and other acute infections to be not the most effective, so we've moved forward with a test that actually tests for the virus itself. We call it nucleic acid testing. Neither of those two approaches have reached a level that meets the FDA standard for being licensed in the United States. So Roche Manufacturing has a test that the FDA has approved to be used operationally without being licensed. At the moment, the United States, the Red Cross, is using that test to protect the blood supply or to test it and what have you. But we are at where we were with HIV in about 1984. 1984, Bob Gallo and Montagnier said, we have a test, but it wasn't yet approved until 1985. So we're right on the threshold, but it's not over until it's licensed. As long as I got the mic, I would like to respond to a previous comment, and that was with regard to the threat of the blood. I think a lot of us are going to go home and say, gee, well, what are we going to do about that? And they're going to say, well, it's a problem that's out there, and the tools for dealing with it weren't there. We talked a lot. I'd like to remind the 33 people, and I counted in the room, that there is an action you can all take that would be life-saving if you called up the Red Cross and volunteered to donate blood tomorrow.
Oh.
There is an action you can take. It's not all talk today. There is an opportunity for each one of us to make a real difference. We may not be able to get the test licensed. We can't identify a lot of the problems, but we can donate a unit of blood that will be life-saving.
Thank you very much for that. Any other comments before we?
I think the
Yeah.
concern that somebody's going to go to Rio and bring back the infection to the United States, I think that's overblown. I think that I don't think somebody who is at high risk for a complication, that is a pregnant woman, should go to watch the Olympics. That's a little different, because the risk to that person is very low, but the outcome is so bad. That's all.
Anyone else to make a final comment?
The general, where's?
Where's John?
Is this working? No? I do want to just take 1 second to talk about the comment that was made about weaponizing Zika and whether it's possible and all of that. And, these issues are complicated. I wouldn't necessarily point to Zika all by itself. Viruses have been weaponized in the past. So if you wanted to weaponize it, you could do the research and eventually weaponize pretty much any virus, I think. You have to overcome certain challenges and so forth. But I think that what instead, if you're the thinking enemy and you're looking at this situation, we have all sorts of things happening. We have a mass gathering in a place where lots of people are at, and we have, private sector interests and there's huge big bucks and lots of countries going and lots of people in one place. We have narco-terrorism and all kinds of terrorism going on at the same time. There's a lot happening there, and Zika happens to be there, and dengue, and other things. Chikungunya. So instead, I would tell you, as a thinking enemy, I wouldn't necessarily weaponize the disease. I would be looking at it and saying, where are the vulnerabilities here that I can take advantage of to do whatever it is that I might want to do. But I want to be clear too that is the case with Brazil, but it's the case with so many other places now at the same time. It's not unique just because the Olympics are happening there. There are all kinds of things happening all over the world. I think the point that should be made is that all these things need to be considered together when you're looking at a situation and evaluating whether there's a high risk or a high threat, and then decide how you're going to address that risk or threat.
General Gray? Sorry.
I want to thank all the panel members for a very, very interesting discussion. I couldn't help but think, if I were in charge of everything, what would I do with this particular set of challenges that were presented? And I said, I guess what I would do is develop a comprehensive, integrated, and detailed contingency plan to handle this potential situation in Latin America. That would include the military, it would include all of the interagency people, it would include everybody that has anything to do with this kind of activities and these kinds of situations, not only in this country, but internationally. We would take the lead as the United States because regardless of world opinion, from time to time, the world expects us to take the lead. But we would take the lead in such a way that we would be a partnership, not just the overall boss or anything like that. We would make great use of the military for a number of reasons. The military has the assets, and only the military has the kinds of assets can really do big things, move a lot of people by air, do this, do that, provide medical support, have the field technical capabilities and all that kind of thing. So that would be the centerpiece of what we would want to do. And another reason we would use the military is because our military has great relationships with the military people in Latin America. There isn't a military organization in Latin America which doesn't have good friends here in the United States and vice versa. Whether it's Colombia, we were working with the Colombian Marines, for example, in 1989 along the Amazon. We went 1,400 kilometers in the Amazon with Colombian Marines to do counter-narcotic kinds of operations. And we've done these kind of things. There's an incredible relationship with the Brazilian Marines, for example, with the Chilean Marines, with Argentina, with all of them. So we would stress that and take advantage of that. We would take a group of people like you, smart people like you, and make you part of this team. And you would help us develop this plan on what we would do in all your areas of expertise, for example, a medical plan. And if you make an assumption that it's not going to happen because of the weather, never have an assumption without an alternate plan. So make provisions for that as well. You would look at this thing offensively, defensively, and from the standpoint of influence. Those are the three cornerstones of information warfare and information operations, and that's what this is all about. And so you'd put everybody together. And not only that, but you'd make sure that the Iranians and those who we don't like and who don't like us for a lot of reasons, including Hezbollah, that they don't get credit for any kind of things that you do. And you think that's far-fetched. I can remember being involved in operations in Laos before most of you were born, in the early 60s, where we provided a lot of the supplies and stuff like that. It was an international effort. And when I got out on the ground in Laos, I found out that the food that we were sending to Laos was all marked in Russian. The Russians had somehow gotten into that and had figured out how to do that. So don't underestimate these people. These people are very cunning, very smart, very bad. I particularly, of course, have a great hatred for Hezbollah because of the Beirut bombing in 1973. Make no bones about it. That money, the money that killed 269 American troops and bombed our embassies later, and the French and the British as well. That money came from Tehran through Damascus to Beirut to the front, and it was managed by the Hezbollah. And the Soviet fuel-enhanced explosives came in the same way. And that was not a small truck bomb in 1983. That was a 19-ton truck with Soviet fuel-enhanced explosives, largest non-nuclear explosion ever. And so this is the kind of thing we're up against. And that was in 1983. You could imagine what can be done now. So these people are smart. Hezbollah is wealthy. They've got more money than you can count, and they're using it, and so on. So all of this has to be put together in a comprehensive contingency plan that covers all the bases. that's what I would think that we ought to do. With that, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, General.